I never imagined that a single text message could determine the future of my children, yet that was exactly what happened. The morning of the custody hearing started like every other difficult morning I had lived through since my divorce. I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet. My son and daughter were still asleep upstairs. For a few minutes, I sat alone in the kitchen staring into a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My hands were steady. At least they looked steady. Inside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. That day would decide where my children would live. That day would decide how often I would see them. That day would decide whether the lies told about me would become part of a permanent court record. I looked toward the staircase. Everything I was fighting for was sleeping up there. Not money. Not revenge. Not pride. Just them. Just my children. I had spent the previous 18 months being portrayed as someone I barely recognized. According to my ex-wife Rachel, I was controlling, emotionally distant, unreliable, obsessed with work, a father who supposedly cared more about his career than his family. The worst part wasn't hearing strangers believe those things. The worst part was watching people who had known me for years slowly start questioning who I really was. Some of our mutual friends stopped calling. Some family members became distant. A few even suggested maybe Rachel had a point. They didn't know the whole story. They only knew the version she wanted them to hear. But I knew the truth. And so did my children. At least I hoped they did. My son Ethan was 9. My daughter Ava was 7. They were the reason I got out of bed every morning. The reason I kept fighting even when the legal bill started draining my savings. The reason I remained calm when every instinct told me to defend myself publicly. I didn't want a war. I wanted peace. Unfortunately, peace wasn't something Rachel seemed interested in. When we first met 12 years earlier, she had been funny, smart, ambitious. The kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel comfortable. I loved her confidence. I loved her energy. I loved the way she could make ordinary moments feel special. For years I believed we were building something permanent. A family. A future. A life. When Ethan was born, I cried harder than he did. When Ava arrived 2 years later, I thought my happiness had reached its limit. Back then I couldn't imagine our family ever breaking apart. But sometimes people change. Or maybe they simply reveal who they truly are. The first signs were small. Arguments became more frequent. Conversations became shorter. Affections slowly disappeared. Then came the criticism. Nothing I did seemed good enough. If I worked late, I was selfish. If I came home early, I wasn't ambitious enough. If I disciplined the kids, I was too strict. If I didn't, I was too soft. No matter what I did, I was wrong. For years I tried fixing things. Marriage counseling, date nights, weekend trips, long conversations. Nothing worked. It felt like I was trying to save a house that had already burned down. Then one evening, Rachel sat across from me at our dining room table. Her expression was cold, almost rehearsed, and she said 6 words that changed everything. I want a divorce. I remember staring at her, waiting for some sign of emotion, some hint that this was difficult for her too. There wasn't one. She looked relieved, as if she had been waiting months to say it. Maybe she had. The divorce itself was painful, but manageable. What came afterward was far worse. At first we agreed that the children needed both parents. We talked about co-parenting, communication, mutual respect, all the things adults are supposed to say. Then something changed. Rachel hired a new attorney, a very aggressive attorney. Within weeks, accusations started appearing. Small accusations at first, then larger ones. Suddenly, I wasn't simply a father seeking shared custody. I was being painted as a potential problem, a risk, an obstacle to stability. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Statements taken out of context, conversations twisted, ordinary disagreements transformed into evidence. Every filing felt like an attack. Every court document felt like another attempt to erase who I really was. The most frustrating part was remaining silent. My attorney kept reminding me, stay calm, stay professional, let the facts speak. Easy advice. Difficult reality, especially when the people you love are involved. One afternoon, Ethan came home unusually quiet. After dinner, he sat beside me on the couch, his eyes focused on the floor. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, buddy. He hesitated, then finally spoke. Mum says you don't really want us living with you. The words hit harder than any legal document ever could. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath. "Look at me, Ethan." He raised his eyes. "Do you think that's true?" He immediately shook his head. "No." "Then that's all that matters. Because it isn't true. Not even a little." A few minutes later, he wrapped his arms around me, and I promised myself something. No matter how ugly things became, I would never force my children to choose sides. They deserve better than that. The months continued passing. Depositions, meetings, evaluations, court filings. The process seemed endless. Rachel remained confident throughout all of it, almost unusually confident, as if she already knew how everything would end. Every time we crossed paths, she wore the same expression, a small smile. Not happiness, not friendliness. Certainty, the kind of smile someone wears when they think victory is guaranteed. Then came the week before the hearing. The final preparations were underway. My attorney and I spent hours reviewing documents, witness statements, school records, schedules, financial records. Everything appeared solid. Yet something still bothered me. Rachel's confidence. It didn't make sense. Late one evening, I sat alone in my home office reviewing old files, mostly out of nervousness. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just couldn't sleep. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The house was quiet. The children were staying with their grandparents that night. As I sorted through old emails and archived messages, I stumbled across something I hadn't seen in over a year. A conversation. A text conversation. At first, it seemed insignificant. Then I read it again, and again. My heart started racing. I immediately sat upright. There was no way. No way she had forgotten this existed. No way her attorney had seen it. Because if they had, they never would have pushed the case this far. I kept reading, every word making my pulse beat faster. For the first time in months, hope appeared. Real hope. Not wishful thinking. Not optimism. Evidence. Actual evidence. I grabbed my phone, called my attorney, and when he answered, I said 4 words. "I found something important." There was silence on the line. Then he asked, "What did you find?" I stared at the screen one more time, reading the message that could change everything. And for the first time since the divorce began, I believed the truth might finally have a chance to be heard. The next morning I arrived at my attorney's office before he did. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same text message, the same words, the same conversation, the same evidence that had somehow remained buried for more than a year. When my attorney, David, finally walked through the door, he immediately noticed the look on my face. "You look like a man who found gold." I handed him my phone. For several seconds he read silently. Then he read it again. The confidence on his face slowly grew. When he finally looked up, his expression had completely changed. "Where did you get this?" "Old backup files. I found it by accident." David leaned back in his chair. "This is significant. Very significant." For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not victory. Not yet. But relief. Because until that moment, it felt like Rachel controlled the entire narrative. Every accusation, every statement, every allegation pointed in one direction. She wanted the court to believe she was the responsible parent, the stable parent, the honest parent. This message suggested something very different. David spent the next hour carefully reviewing every detail. Dates, times, context, authenticity, everything. He knew the court would examine every piece of evidence closely, especially something introduced so close to the hearing. "Can they block it?" I finally asked. "Maybe," David admitted. "But if we can establish relevance, there's a strong chance the judge allows it." That wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was honest. And after months of dealing with manipulation, honesty felt refreshing. The following days became a blur. David prepared motions, gathered supporting records, verified timestamps, cross-referenced conversations. Every step mattered. Meanwhile, Rachel continued acting as though the outcome was already decided. She posted photos online, smiling, vacationing, celebrating birthdays, living as if the custody ruling was a formality. Friends commented underneath, "You're such an amazing mother. Those kids are lucky to have you. You'll definitely win." Reading those comments made my stomach turn. Not because Rachel didn't love the children. She did. In her own way. But because nobody saw the full picture. Nobody saw the private conversations. Nobody saw the lies. Nobody saw the manipulation. They only saw the image she carefully presented. 3 days before court, my daughter Ava asked me a question that nearly broke my heart. "Daddy, are you moving away?" The question came completely out of nowhere. We were eating pancakes together, just the two of us. I set my fork down. "Why would you ask that?" Her eyes lowered. "Mum said sometimes dads leave when things change." The room suddenly felt smaller. I forced myself to stay calm. "Ava, look at me." She did. "No matter what happens, I will never leave you. Never. Do you understand?" She nodded, then climbed into my lap and hugged me so tightly I thought my heart would stop. Those moments reminded me why I couldn't give up, why I couldn't simply accept the false version of events being presented in court. This wasn't about winning. This was about protecting the truth. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Every possible outcome played through my mind. What if the evidence was rejected? What if the judge refused to review it? What if none of it mattered? Fear has a way of creating 1,000 disasters that haven't happened yet. By sunrise, I was exhausted, but determined. The courthouse stood in the center of downtown. Tall, cold, imposing. When I arrived, the parking lot was already filling up. Lawyers, witnesses, families, people carrying pieces of their lives into courtrooms, hoping strangers would make fair decisions. I sat in my car for a few moments, taking deep breaths. Then my phone vibrated. A message from David. "We're ready." I stepped out, straightened my tie, and walked toward the entrance. Inside the building, the atmosphere felt heavy. Every hallway carried tension. Every waiting area seemed filled with anxiety. David was already reviewing documents when I found him. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane." He laughed. "That's normal." Then his expression became serious. "Remember something. Today isn't about emotions. It's about facts. Facts win." I nodded, trying to believe him. About 30 minutes later, Rachel arrived. The moment I saw her, my stomach tightened. She looked completely relaxed, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, almost cheerful. Walking beside her was her attorney, a man known for aggressive tactics. Rachel spotted me across the room, and there it was again. That smile, that familiar smirk, the same expression she'd worn for months. The expression of someone who believed she had already won. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her face said everything. David noticed too. "Confident people make mistakes," he quietly said. "What does that mean?" "It means they stop checking for surprises." The hearing began shortly afterward. The courtroom looked exactly how I remembered. Dark wood, high ceilings, rows of seats. The judge's bench towering above everyone. I took my place. Rachel sat across from me. Her attorney organized documents with mechanical precision. Several family members sat behind us, watching, waiting, judging. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat, and the hearing officially began. For hours, testimony moved back and forth. Questions, answers, arguments, objections. Rachel spoke confidently, almost flawlessly. She described herself as the stable parent, the reliable parent, the parent who always put the children first. Listening to her felt surreal. At times I wondered if she actually believed her own version of events, or if she had repeated it so many times that it became reality in her mind. When my turn came, I answered every question calmly, directly, honestly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't attack. I simply told the truth. David had warned me repeatedly. Jurors aren't here. The judge is. And judges recognize performance. So I stayed composed, even when difficult accusations surfaced. As the afternoon continued, the tension grew. Then came the moment we had been waiting for. David stood. "Your Honor, we would like to introduce additional evidence." Immediately Rachel's attorney objected. The timing, the relevance, the procedure. He challenged everything. For nearly 15 minutes, legal arguments filled the courtroom. I could barely breathe. This was the moment. The evidence either entered the record or disappeared forever. The judge listened carefully, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking questions. Rachel no longer looked completely comfortable. For the first time all day, her confidence appeared shaken. Finally, the courtroom became silent. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked down at the documents, then spoke. "I will review the evidence." The words hit like thunder. Rachel's attorney froze. David remained calm, but I could see satisfaction in his eyes. The judge extended his hand. The document was delivered. My pulse raced. The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Rachel stared toward the bench, her expression slowly changing. The confidence, the certainty, the smirk, all beginning to fade. The judge opened the file, turned the first page, then another. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then the judge stopped on one particular page. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the date, then the message, then back at the date again. And for the first time all day, his expression changed. He looked directly toward Rachel, then back at the document, and finally spoke 7 words that made the entire courtroom freeze. "Let's read this message carefully." The courtroom became completely silent. Even the air felt different. The kind of silence that happens when everyone senses something important is about to happen. The judge adjusted the papers in front of him, then looked directly at Rachel. For the first time that day, her confidence appeared fragile. The smirk that had been on her face all morning was gone. Her attorney shifted slightly in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. The judge lowered his eyes toward the document again, then began reading. This message was sent on March 14th at 8:43 p.m. His voice echoed through the courtroom. Every person listening became completely focused. The judge continued. The sender writes, "I know the kids love their father, but if I can convince the court that he is unstable, I can get primary custody." The courtroom froze. My heart nearly stopped. Rachel's face immediately lost color. Several people sitting behind us exchanged shocked looks. The judge continued reading. He showed no emotion, no opinion, just facts. The sender then writes, "Once custody is settled, I won't have to deal with him anymore." A woman sitting in the gallery covered her mouth. Another person leaned forward in disbelief. Rachel's attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor." Context matters. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, counselor." The attorney slowly sat back down. Rachel stared at the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The judge continued reading. The message thread continued for several pages. Each new message created more damage. Every line contradicted statements Rachel had previously made under oath. Every line painted a completely different picture from the one she had spent months presenting. I could hear quiet whispers spreading through the gallery. The atmosphere inside the courtroom had completely changed. Only minutes earlier, Rachel had appeared untouchable. Now every person in the room was questioning her credibility. The judge turned another page. According to this conversation, the sender acknowledges that the father consistently attended school events, medical appointments, parent-teacher meetings, and extracurricular activities, yet earlier testimony suggested otherwise. Rachel's attorney immediately stood again. "Objection." The judge looked at him. "On what grounds?" The attorney hesitated, then sat back down. The judge returned to the document. The silence grew heavier. Rachel remained frozen, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the table. For months I had imagined this moment, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted the truth to finally exist somewhere outside my own head. For over a year I had listened to accusations, assumptions, distortions. Now the facts were speaking for themselves, and facts are difficult to argue with. The judge continued reading. Then he reached another message. This one was even worse. His expression became noticeably more serious. The courtroom sensed it immediately. The judge looked directly at Rachel, then read aloud. "I need the children to believe their father chose work over them. If they repeat that during interviews, it helps my case." A collective gasp moved through the room. The reaction was impossible to ignore. Even Rachel's own relatives appeared shocked. One elderly woman sitting behind her slowly lowered her head, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. My attorney remained calm, but I could see satisfaction in his eyes. Not because Rachel was suffering, because the truth was finally emerging. The judge carefully placed the page on the desk, then looked toward Rachel. "Mrs. Parker, did you send these messages?" For several seconds she said nothing. The entire courtroom waited. Finally she answered, "Yes." The word barely escaped her mouth. The judge nodded, and continued. "Were these messages authentic and unaltered?" Another pause. Then, Yes. Her attorney closed his eyes for a brief moment. The damage was becoming impossible to contain. The judge continued reviewing the evidence. Additional records had already verified the timestamps, the recipients, the dates. Everything matched. There was no question regarding authenticity. The evidence was legitimate. Rachel's attorney attempted to recover. He argued that people sometimes vent emotionally, that private conversations don't always reflect true intentions, that custody decisions should focus on present circumstances. Some of his arguments were reasonable, but the problem was obvious. Rachel had spent months presenting herself as completely honest. The text messages directly contradicted that image. Credibility matters, especially in custody court. The judge listened carefully, then turned toward me. Mr. Parker, I have a question. Yes, Your Honor. Have you reviewed these messages before today? No, Your Honor. I discovered them recently in archived records. The judge nodded, then asked another question. Did you ever encourage your children to speak negatively about their mother? No, Your Honor. Never. That answer was easy, because it was true. The judge studied me for several seconds, then returned his attention to the documents. The courtroom remained completely focused. Nobody checked phones. Nobody whispered anymore. Everyone understood they were witnessing the turning point of the case. The next witness was called, a family counselor who had worked with the children. Her testimony became critical. She explained how both children consistently expressed love for both parents. She also revealed something unexpected. Several interviews showed concern regarding comments they heard from adults. The judge asked her to elaborate. The counselor opened her notes. On multiple occasions, the children repeated statements suggesting their father did not care about them. However, when questioned further, neither child could provide examples supporting those beliefs. The judge listened carefully. The counselor continued. The statements appeared learned rather than experienced. Another devastating blow. The courtroom could practically feel momentum shifting. Rachel's attorney attempted damage control, but every explanation seemed weaker than the evidence already presented. As the afternoon continued, more testimony followed. School records, attendance records, communication logs, medical appointment histories. Every piece of evidence supported one conclusion. I had remained actively involved in my children's lives. The image Rachel created simply wasn't supported by facts. Eventually, the judge called for a short recess. The moment he left the courtroom, conversations immediately erupted. People whispered everywhere. Some looked shocked, others confused. A few looked embarrassed. Rachel remained seated, staring down at the table. The confidence she had displayed that morning had completely disappeared. For the first time since the divorce began, she looked uncertain. David leaned toward me. "You're okay?" I nodded slowly. Honestly, I wasn't feeling victorious. I was feeling exhausted. The last 18 months had taken a toll. Emotionally, financially, mentally. Watching the truth emerge felt less like winning, and more like finally putting down a weight I had been carrying for too long. When the recess ended, everyone returned to their seats. The judge resumed proceedings. His demeanor remained calm, professional, careful. But his questions became increasingly focused, particularly regarding honesty, consistency, and parental influence. Each answer mattered. Every detail mattered. Hours passed. Then finally the testimony concluded. The courtroom grew silent once again. The judge organized his notes. Several thick files sat before him. Evidence, statements, reports, messages. Months of conflict reduced to stacks of paper. The future of 2 children resting inside those files. The judge looked toward both attorneys. "I've heard enough." Those 4 words immediately tightened every muscle in my body. The judge continued. "This case involves serious concerns regarding credibility, parental influence, and the best interests of the children. I will review the evidence carefully before issuing my final ruling." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The moment felt enormous. Rachel looked terrified. Her attorney appeared deeply concerned. David remained composed. The judge gathered his documents, then stood. "Court is recessed pending final determination." The gavel struck, and just like that, the most important decision of our lives moved behind closed doors. As the judge exited the courtroom, I looked toward my children sitting quietly with family members. Neither of them fully understood what had just happened, but they knew something important was changing. I silently prayed that whatever happened next, the truth would finally matter, because after everything we had endured, our future now rested in the hands of one man, a man who had just read the message that changed everything. The wait felt endless. After the judge left the courtroom, nobody seemed comfortable. Conversations were quiet, nervous, uncertain. Even the attorneys stopped pretending they knew what would happen. I sat alone for a while, watching the hallway through a nearby window. People walked past carrying folders and briefcases. For them it was just another workday. For me it was the most important day of my life. A few minutes later, Ethan and Ava came over. Neither of them said much. They simply sat beside me. Ethan leaned against my shoulder. Ava held my hand. That simple moment reminded me what truly mattered. Not winning. Not proving Rachel wrong. Just being there for them. About an hour later, we were called back into the courtroom. The atmosphere had completely changed. Rachel looked exhausted. Her attorney appeared tense. David remained calm but focused. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The room became silent. The judge opened a file, looked down for several seconds, then began speaking. The court's responsibility is to determine what serves the best interests of the children. Everything else is secondary. He reviewed the evidence, the testimony, the evaluations, the records. Then he addressed the text messages directly. The court has serious concerns regarding attempts to influence the children's perception of their father. My heart pounded. Rachel lowered her eyes. The judge continued. Honesty and credibility are essential in custody matters. When a parent deliberately presents misleading information, the court must consider the potential impact on the children. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judge turned another page. After reviewing all evidence, the court finds that both parents love their children. However, the evidence demonstrates that Mr. Parker has consistently encouraged a healthy relationship between the children and their mother. The same cannot be said in reverse. Rachel looked as though she might cry. The judge continued. The court therefore awards primary custody to Mr. Parker. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I wasn't sure I had heard correctly. Then Ethan grabbed my arm. Dad, did we win? Tears immediately filled my eyes. I nodded. Yes, buddy. We did. Ava wrapped her arms around me. And suddenly, every sleepless night, every legal bill, every accusation, every painful moment felt worth enduring. The judge continued explaining visitation arrangements and future requirements. But honestly, most of it sounded distant. The only thing I could focus on was the fact that my children would remain in my life. Not occasionally, not temporarily, but permanently. When the hearing ended, people slowly began leaving. Rachel remained seated. For several moments she didn't move. Then she finally stood and approached me. I expected anger, excuses, blame. Instead she looked tired, defeated, and older than I remembered. She glanced at the children, then back at me. I'm sorry. The words surprised me. For the first time in a long time, she sounded sincere. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mock her. I simply nodded. Because despite everything, she was still their mother. Months later, life became peaceful again. The children adjusted quickly. The conflict disappeared. The stress faded. And our home finally felt normal. One evening I watched Ethan and Ava laughing together in the backyard. The setting sun painted everything gold. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Looking back now, the text message didn't change everything. It simply revealed everything. The truth had always existed. It had just been hidden. And eventually the truth found its way into the light. If there's one lesson I learned from the experience, it's this. Lies can move fast. They can convince people. They can create doubt. But the truth is patient. And sooner or later, the truth catches up. No matter how long it takes. This story delivers powerful educational value by demonstrating how truth, integrity, and responsible parenting can overcome manipulation during one of the most emotionally challenging experiences a family can face. The narrative teaches that custody battles should never be viewed as contests between parents, but as serious decisions centered on the welfare and emotional stability of children. Throughout the story, the father remains focused on protecting his children rather than seeking revenge against his ex-wife, showing viewers the importance of maturity during conflict. A major lesson involves credibility. The father consistently tells the truth, remains calm under pressure, and allows facts to speak on his behalf. In contrast, the ex-wife attempts to shape perceptions through misleading claims and emotional manipulation. When the court discovers evidence that contradicts her statements, her credibility collapses. This highlights a valuable principle that applies to both personal and professional life. Honesty creates trust, while deception eventually destroys it. The story also emphasizes the dangers of involving children in adult disputes. Attempts to influence how children view a parent can cause emotional confusion and long-term harm. The father's refusal to speak negatively about their mother demonstrates emotional intelligence and healthy parenting. His actions reinforce the idea that children deserve love, stability, and protection from conflicts they did not create. Another important educational element is the role of evidence. A single forgotten text message becomes the turning point because it reveals the truth behind months of false accusations. The story reminds viewers that facts, records, and documented communication often carry more weight than assumptions or emotional narratives. It encourages responsibility and careful communication in all aspects of life. Finally, the script teaches perseverance. The father faces public judgment, financial strain,